0032.
G'day Jap Adventures, Terry King here. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to another build video in the FJ45 restomod. Today's a pretty exciting day. In January of this year, I placed an order for suspension from ARB. It's now May and it has arrived. So I'm going to be loading up the suspension on this car, which will allow me to get to the next very exciting stage, which is mounting the LS in between the frames. But first things first, let's get stuck into the suspension, shall we? Let's do it. Okay, let's get the yucky job out of the way first. We've got to grease up all of these bushes and insert them into the spring eyes and into the chassis eyes. And in my case, this is a black molybdenum grease, which is the recommended grease for it. It's just nasty, that's all. It is nice to be working with new suspension components, though, I've got to admit. Lovely. Once I've got all of the spring bushes loaded in, and then I need to load in the chassis bushes. All our bushes are installed on the frame, front and rear. The next step is to assemble these front shackle pins, and that's just simply a matter of screwing that in there. And then they've got a lock nut which goes on the back. Now they don't say to use Loctite, but you know what? I can't think of an instance where I would need to take these things apart again. So I will actually Loctite them and then put that nut on it. Now that raised area there needs to face in because that recesses into the chassis. And then our locking nut goes on over top of that. That's a 22 mil bolt. So now I'll rinse and repeat that for the other front shackle pin. And again, there's our greasable shackle pins. Number 2. And our 2 locking nuts. Now we rinse and repeat on the other side. So I got the front knocked over, and now it's time to do the rear. And it's pretty much the same as the front. The shackle plates are just a little bit different shape, that's all. That plate then sits over top of all of them. That's it, completely assembled. Just need to put the Zerk fittings in the end of that so that the grease can go through them. Now I gotta raise the chassis up to get these horses out of here so that I can get the springs under there and then the diff under there. So I'm hoping that this is gonna do the trick. Sweet. Alrighty, got my shackle pin all greased up. Got my new leaf spring. I twisted it off. You frickin' believe it. So after snapping the head off the bolt and having to get the rest of it out with an easy out, I can give you the hot tip. First of all, don't use an ugga-dugga on those. They're only a 12 mil headed bolt, so they're just tiny. Second of all, don't use a long bolt because it'll run through here and it'll actually hit up against the spring. And when it does, that's when you snap him off. So now I've got some shorter bolts, which we'll just run in nice and gently by hand. And we'll tighten with a nice inoffensive ring spanner. Now I'll pop the Zerk fitting in on the end. We won't use an ugga-dugga to tighten that. Nice little 8 mil. And I won't tighten up that shackle pin yet until I lift that spring up in place. Alright, the other side spring is in. Now I'll roll this diff under. Alright, I got the jack under the diff so that I can lift the spring up. These anti-inversion shackles, that needs to be pointing towards the spring and it needs to be sitting on the top. So that pops in like so, and then we grab our leaf spring get our knockometer and drive it home. The shackle plate goes on the side, like so. Alright, now I just need to torque those down, but I won't do that yet. I'll wait until I got the diff in position and everything's sort of lined up. See if I can get that to locate on its pin. Beautiful. Well, here's a little trap for the uninitiated, i.e. me. See that bump stop there? It's not actually lined up with the diff. And I'm going, uh-oh, something funky going on there. And what it is my springs on the front are on backwards. See these plus marks here? They actually point towards the fixed end of the spring, not to the front or the rear. So that plus there should be at the back here where there's a fixed part of the spring. And on the rears, the plus goes to the front because that's the fixed part on the frame. So there you go. Guess what I get to do? I get to disassemble that front end again. Ah well, we'll call it quits tonight. I'll tackle that one tomorrow. Time for a beer. All right, following morning. Had a beer last night, had a good sleep, done giving myself an uppercut for being an idiot, and I've got the suspension around the right way now. Plus sign with an arrow pointing towards the fixed end of the suspension, just like it's supposed to be on both sides. Next step now, I'll throw the U-bolts on to lock this diff down, put some Shockies in, and then we'll move on to the back side. All right, we got our U-bolts. We've got these plates, which I've sandblasted and painted up earlier, and you can't get the U-bolts around the wrong way. They only fit in one way. But another way to determine whether it's right or not is that these edges here should be facing front and back. And the idea there is that it basically protects those bolts from getting shot peened from gibbers and stones that you go running through. On the driver's side in Australia, or the right-hand side, you've got two different length U-bolts. And one's a little bit longer because it runs up on this part of the diff housing. And the shorter one, obviously, on the other side. So that guy goes there. That guy goes up over there. Now, time to torque these down. They're 90 foot-pounds. I'll hit them with the Ugga-Dugga first, and then I'll hit them with the torque wrench. "90 foot-pounds. Nice. That's it. One side done, we'll do the other. Now it's time to insert the bushes into our Shockies. So I'll just take some of this super grease and put it on the bush. One thing you don't get with these shocks is any of the mounting hardware. So I've got to use my old crusty 50-year-old mounting hardware on these things, which I'm just not a big fan of. So ARB, you can lift your game a little bit there. Time to load the shocks up on this thing, and here's something I'm not too pleased about. That's my old mounting hardware, the old crusty washers, and the bolts don't look much better. You don't actually get new mounting hardware with these Shockies. So you got to use your old crap or buy it separately. So I won't tighten these shocks down because I am not going to be using these crusty old things for the long term. Yeah, just really disappointed about that. I don't think I'm asking too much to have new hardware supplied with a $2,000 suspension setup. So I haven't greased those pins either for that very reason, that I've got to get new hardware. Getting a bit of color on the chassis now. That's cool. That's it, the Shockies are set up. Next I'll go ahead and torque all of the bolts down on the suspension system. And the ARB give you the specifications in their destruction sheet. So I won't go ahead and film that, but everything needs to be torqued down next. You know you're getting close to the end when you're putting stickers on. Beautiful. All right, the only thing left to do on the front suspension is grease it. And I'm not gonna do that yet because I've gotta finish the back and I'll grease everything all at once. That's it, let's move on to the back. So I'm at the rear of the vehicle now, and that is the shackle pin that ARB give you, and that's for the front hanger on the rear spring. And I'm looking at that going, what the heck is going on? Because that's the one that comes out of the factory. And then it sort of dawned on me, I wonder whether that's actually just a collar and this is a pin. So that sits inside of there. So I'm gonna get a hammer and we're gonna wail on that and see if that drives that pin out. Sure enough, that's moving. Well, there we go. It's got a little sort of spline on it, almost like a wheel nut. And that one obviously drives back in through there. So I'm gonna have to clean that little sucker up before putting my shackle pin in. Far out. You'd think that ARB could have given you that little piece there as well. So I sprayed that with a little bit of cold gal paint, let it dry overnight, and now I'll drive that pin in. Well, after starting that with a punch, I decided to use my brain and use a hydraulic press to drive this thing home. So much easier. Just like that. Sweet. Here's something to be aware of on the rear springs. One spring on mine has this marking on it. The second spring has this plus marking on it. Now, I spoke to a good mate of mine at ARB, and he indicated that those two marks are just a slight different bias or a slight different height. And the one with the O on it is slightly shorter, and the one with the plus on it is marginally taller. The idea there is the plus one goes on the driver's side of the car, where you typically have a little bit more weight, and the O side goes on the passenger side. Again, both of those marks point to the fixed end of the spring, which on the rear springs is the front. So let's get these suckers installed. Put a bit of grease on our shackle pin. I'll put a bit on this bore as well, just to help it slide on home. It would be awesome if I had a helper for this, because this is going to be heavy. Put a little bit of grease on the face of these bushes to help them get on home as well. Okay, Mr. Pin. In you go. There's a flat on here that lines up with the flat on the hanger. So you actually got to clock that around the right way. Oh shit, I'm close. I think I got it. See, I'm striking that on an angle so I'm not hitting that Zerk fitting. See if I can get that nut on the back side and pull that through. I got my diff jacked up a couple inches to clear the spring. I've got grease on the shackle pins. Now it's time to lift this spring into place and try not to blow a foo-foo valve. Got him. Sweet. Now our shackle plate. Okay, now we'll drop our diff down. Well, there we go. It doesn't even look like I needed to raise the diff up because the spring is hanging lower than the diff. I've just jacked the chassis up to bring the spring closer to the diff. And I think we're pretty close there. A couple more pumps of the jack. That's it. That side of the diff is seated. Pop on our new bump stop. 2 new U-bolts. And these plates, which I blasted earlier. So I got the U-bolts installed and they're all torqued down. The only thing you gotta make sure you don't forget are these bump stops, because those bump stops are captive with the U-bolts. So that's it. I'll drop this sucker down off the jack and we'll install the Shockies. Nice. First time it's been sitting on its own feet for months and months. Awesome. These rear Shockies come with these little compression straps. So you just slide them off or snip them off and wait for the Shocky to come down to your pin. A Got the Shockies installed left and right side. No hardware on them for the same reason that the fronts have no hardware. ARB doesn't supply them, so I'll need to go and buy new hardware. Next, I'll grease all the grease points up on these shackles and call it done. Why don't these grease guns come off these zert fittings with a little bit of dignity? Far out. All greased up, front suspension all done, except for the mounting hardware for the Shockies. Rear suspension all done, except for the mounting hardware for the Shockies. Still got to put the sway bar on, but we're nearly ready to fit this LSA. To get the mounting positions correct, I need to fit the tub back onto the chassis. And my mounts are pretty much cactus. That one's rotted out, that one's missing. That one's gone, and that one's gone. I do have a crusty old donor tub here, however, and that is where I'm going to pick up these mounts, which are in pretty decent shape, which is surprising given the state of the rest of the tub. But these tubs here, that's going to be the subject of another video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hit that subscribe button, keep the shiny side up, enjoy yourselves, have a good one. Bye now.